Thank you all. And today the story is going to be about story, and everyone has one. In fact, it would be a great assignment from your journalism professors for you to tell a story, but it's not allowed to be the story of you. Because in the end, what's great about real good storytellers is they write about other people. Great storytellers are curious about others. Memoirists write about themselves. And by the way, at the age of 18 to 22, I would always say, ask other people questions. You'll learn a lot more than digging deep inside yourself to figure out who you are. Go out and talk to the world, engage the world. I've been doing this for 40 years. My dad always told me, go meet that person, call him up. He won't care. And I called up people that you would think I shouldn't have called up. And I'd say, sir, I want to get to know you. Ma'am, I want to get to know you. And they'd say, come on in. And I would always come with a pen and pad, and I would ask them questions. Tell me about your early life. Tell me about obstacles and adversity you overcame. Tell me about your parents. Tell me about your first love. Tell me about the first time someone broke your heart. Tell me about your greatest success, but the most important question I ask people, tell me about your greatest failure. Because life is about failures and overcoming them. And then you start to have this engagement with people, and suddenly you're walking in their shoes. The biggest problem today in life, and the reason there's not as much good storytelling as there can and should be, is people are trying to tell their story to other people. Why don't you just ask somebody else about theirs? What a crazy idea. Who are you? Where are you from? What do you care about? So I want to start this off by talking about story. And, well, the power is... This is not clicking for some reason. Okay. Hit the top? No, not. Samir?
Is it on?
Good question.
On this side.
On the side? Okay. This is a poet, Muriel Rukeyser, and I think this is a great quote. I love to start off with this. The world is made up of stories, not atoms. And, why is that so? Well, before I get into why it's so, let's talk about the greatest selling book of all time. Christian or not, this book was the biggest blockbuster of all time. It still is. It's the #1 bestseller every year, by far. It's called the Bible. And what is the Bible? It's just a book filled with stories. From beginning to end, wretched stories, beautiful stories, tragic stories, my goodness, death and mayhem and infidelity and betrayal. Adam and Eve. Cain and Abel. By the way, brother betraying brother. Does it still happen? The prodigal son. Son disobeys father. Father allows son to come home in a loving space. A great instruction manual, by the way, for fatherhood. And by the way, for sons who are disobedient, if you're lucky enough to have a father, which we'll talk about later. But the prodigal son. And by the way, if you think the OJ trial was the trial of the 20th century, the trial of Christ at the Sanhedrin was the greatest trial of all time. And again, you don't have to be a Christian to believe these things. William Faulkner's books continually quote the Bible. And by the way, Martin Luther King, the most important man possibly of the 20th century, was a Christian. And everything he did was because of his Christian faith. So if you're not Christians, you should still be curious about them. And by the way, if you are a Christian, you should be curious about your atheist brothers and sisters, your Muslim brothers and sisters. Because in the end, we all have the same basic things that we live for. We all have love. We all think about it, that revenge is a part of our life. Betrayal is a part of our life. Death is a part of our life. In the end, storytelling is the world's oldest killer app. The oldest killer app. So why is that? It's because in the end, stories are designed in the narrative form, and we just get to step into them. I stepped into the story of Jonah, and I kept stepping into it in the Bible. And at the age of 43, I became a Christian. I'd been running from God. I was told by my professors God was silly. I went to 2 colleges where you weren't even allowed, not for the most part, no one even talked about God. I don't know how that's possible, because whether you believe or not, it's still the biggest eternal question. Is there a God? And who is he or she? Big questions. So finally, in my discovery and my search, it was the story of Jonah that kept coming back to me. I kept running from God, and God mercifully kept running after me. And that's, by the way, about 1.7 billion people's story in the world. So to ignore the story of Christians, oh my goodness, you're missing a gap. And by the way, you're missing an audience. To not tell the story of Muslims, you're missing an audience. There's 1.1 billion Muslims. Jews, not to tell the story of Judaism, another big audience. Buddhists. This is 70% of the world. So as you're writing and you're telling stories, remember, these people's stories matter. Not too long ago, about 4 years ago, I had been involved in political talk radio, and I was getting tired of it. I was tired of the debates, tired of the arguments, and I started to ask myself, what are things people can agree on? When do people not fight? And when they don't fight is when a person gets up and says, once upon a time. When a person tells their story, you can't tell them their story's wrong. It's their story. So we decided that, well, we looked around the world, and you would think, listening to social media, Fox News and MSNBC, and most of the news, that the world's coming to an end. It's all downward spirals. The biggest bias in the media isn't that it leans left, which it does, in my opinion, but the bigger bias is that it loves the train wreck. Murder, murder, fire, fire. So I ask you, how many of you think it's more dangerous in America today than 1979? How many of you think it's more dangerous? All right, a few of you do. Here are some stats. New York City, 1979, 2,200 murders. 2,200 murders. This year, 298. That's a miracle. So you would think the story every day should be, oh my goodness, we're safer than we've ever been. Not the story. Think about the miraculous drugs we have on the markets today that extend life. What do you think the average lifespan was at the end of the 19th century? 18th century, 16th century. How many of you would rather be alive in the 17th century than today? 18th, 19th. So some of the things we started to think about were, wow, what if people are for the most part happy? What if they love their country? They don't think it's a perfect country, but they love their country. And by the way, one of the premises of this show I'm about to tell you about, and some of the stories we'll share, is that I was always dragged to induction ceremonies at the Statue of Liberty in Jersey City, right outside the Statue of Liberty when I was a kid, by both grandparents. My Lebanese grandparents and my Italian grandparents brought me to watch new people swear in under oath their loyalty to the United States of America. By the way, they had to read an oath, renouncing their citizenship, swearing their allegiance to the Constitution, and saying that they would defend their country. And every single time I cried, and if you all went, you'd cry too. And the people were from places like Botswana, and India, and the Middle East, and China, and Japan. By the way, something along the lines of a few 100 million people right now want to come here. In fact, think about what's happening at the border. Whatever your opinion about legal immigration, here's my opinion. Those people want in. They want to come here. And think about where they're coming from. They're coming from Guatemala. They're walking all the way up past all of those countries, including right through Mexico, dragging their children with them. Why? Why do so many people want to come here if it's such a backwards, racist, evil country? By the way, Africa has record numbers. Nigerians are knocking the ball off the cover here, economically and in every other way. So this was the central premise for this show. Things aren't as bad as they say, and we're going to tell good stories, positive stories about our country. Crazy idea. So this is the first story I want to talk to you about, and I'll tell you a few different ways to tell stories, because I tell stories in print, and I tell stories digitally. But it all starts with a written word. It all starts with you and a keyboard. So I love to ask questions, and with my staff, I'm always piquing their curiosity. I'm always asking a question to them and telling them to go seek the answer. So here was a piece we did not long ago. Does anybody know who this man is? He was the Post Malone, the Lady Gaga, and the Chris Stapleton all rolled into one in the early 20th century as a songwriter. You know his music. He was born Israel Berlin in Russia in 1888. He became Irving Berlin when he came to this country. But here's why he came to America. His family were Jews. They were living in Russia. And Russians didn't like Jews. In fact, they so didn't like Jews that they started burning down their villages. Irving Berlin's last memory was watching his father crying as the family business and home was burned to the ground by Russians. At 5 years old, that's his only memory of Russia. He comes to the United States, comes to New York City. His father dies when he's 8. So any of us who want to put on our pity hats, no one cares. Because you want to talk about adversity? It doesn't get worse than this. And by the way, there was plenty of anti-Semitism in the United States. Jews were discriminated almost every turn. Their rebuttal was, F you. We will not be denied. We are children of God. This country, well, there's opportunity everywhere. By the way, the richest Americans per capita. Any guess? Jewish Americans, number 2. Discriminated against, 60% of their people killed in Europe. Killed, murdered. Right? Pretty bad. Second wealthiest, only topped by Indian Americans, who are the richest in America. And they come from places like Mumbai. Indians. Indians know poverty. And by the way, Indians know what a caste system looks like, because there is a caste system in India. Richest Indians, second richest Jewish Americans. So much for ethnic minorities not being able to do well in America. It's a lie. It's just a myth. So Irving Berlin comes to the country, father dies, he has to get a job, no schooling. He can't go to school, there's no money to feed the family. He starts singing at tables that he's waiting, his tips start going up, it turns out he has a talent for melody. And what does he do? He just keeps on singing and writing. He writes his first #1 song in 1911, Alexander Ragtime's Band. And then in 1918 he writes a song called God Bless America. Nobody liked it, nobody was buying it. So he stuck it in a drawer. But in 1938, he brought it out again. Hitler was just about to establish his worldwide dominance by dominating Europe first. And the winds of war were coming in America. People your age, right at your age, they knew where they were going to be shipped in a year or 2. By the way, there were no safe zones in Europe fighting Nazis. Real life Nazis, not the way people haul around the word Nazi on campuses. Real life Nazis. In fact, my mother's only brother got killed by real-life Nazis at the age of 18 in Bastogne. So D-Day, God Bless America gets recorded, big hit, and he records standard after standard after standard, 1,500 songs. He becomes a very wealthy man because he owned his own songs. He owned the publishing. And think about Dr. Dre today. Same story, right? Comes from nothing. Comes from L.A. Comes from tough neighborhoods in L.A., from Compton, of all places. Look at his life's arc. It's a study in the possible, right? It's a study in the beautiful. Here's the most interesting thing about Berlin's life. A Jew wrote White Christmas, because he also happened to write White Christmas. God Bless America and White Christmas. This is the biggest selling single of all time. To date, 55 million singles sold. And by the way, it's a song we still know and sing. So a Jew wrote White Christmas, a Russian wrote God Bless America, and they were the same guy. And only in America is that story possible. So anyway, I wrote up that story, put it out on Newsweek. It did very well, because it was Irving Berlin's birthday. People sort of knew his name, sort of knew his story, but didn't know the rest of the story. And the rest of the story is always interesting. It's always interesting. Next story. That's a Higgins boat made in New Orleans. Eisenhower said without the Higgins boat we couldn't have won the war because we were fighting amphibious invasions. We had to move hundreds and hundreds of thousands of men, tanks, all kinds of other equipment to both Europe and to Asia. D-Day, boy, what an invasion. Couple of 100,000 boats, 50,000 planes, a few 100,000 men, and some women too, for support. And on this day, 2,500 Americans died in one day. One day. And they were gunned down, as you can see, those hills up there. This is the Higgins boat looking straight at the beaches. On those beaches are mountaintops. Up in those mountaintops were giant German machine guns, sitting there just mowing our guys down. And these poor guys had to walk out and go straight towards those guns. I love this generation, by the way, because they weren't asking for things. They were serving their country. They weren't asking their country for anything. They were dying for their country. So we do a storytelling show, and it's a big show now. We started 4 years ago in one market, and now we're in 220. We're on in Los Angeles, we're on in St. Louis, Boston, Des Moines, because it turns out Americans are sick of all the noise too. They want to be inspired by people. They don't want to hear about what's wrong. We know what's wrong. What's right? How do we fix it? And how do we celebrate people who've done great things? So a guy calls us up in Los Angeles. He's a listener. And his name is Frank DeVita. And he said, I was at D-Day. I love the way you guys do veteran stories. Can I tell you my story? I was 19 years old. I was in the Coast Guard. I thought that would be an easy gig. But it wasn't an easy gig. It turned out, guess who commanded these Higgins boats? The Coast Guard. So he has to go from the big ship, put all these men, anywhere from 18 to 20 at a time with all their equipment, bring them to the shore, go back to the big boat, go back to the shore, back and forth 35, 40 times. Right back into gunfire. Not a duck walk, right? So here's Frank DeVita all these years later telling us a story about his life.
Now, I was 3/4 of the way back because I had to take the ramp and drop the ramp. So I was 3/4 of the way back. So I had some protection because...
Let's start that again.
Kids that were in front of me, the troops that were in front of me. Now, I was 3/4 of the way back because I had to take the ramp and drop the ramp. So I was 3/4 of the way back. So I had some protection because the kids that were in front of me, the troops that were in front of me, they saw the boats. And they were falling down. And then there was two kids, stragglers, they call them stragglers. They kept back because they didn't want to be in front of the boat because they knew they would die. So they stayed back. And they stayed near me, which is a bad thing because besides the machine guns on the beach, it was a machine gun in the hill. And they were shooting down from the hill. So that's in a crossfire. And these two boys, since they stayed close to me, they were drawing fire to me. Now the first boy was about 4 feet away from me. He got a machine gun in his stomach. His stomach was sticking out of his. Luckily that kid, somehow, he survived the war, even though his stomach was ripped open. The second kid, he was about two feet away from me. He wasn't so lucky. The machine gun took his helmet off and part of his skull. And he was crying, help me, help me, help me. And he fell at my feet. And I couldn't help him. I had no morphine. I had nothing to help him. So the only thing I could do was start praying for him. Our Father who art in heaven. I never finished the prayer. And it seemed to soothe him. He stopped screaming, help me, when I said the prayer. Then I reached down and I touched his head. I touched his head because I wanted him to know he wasn't alone. What little strength he had, he put his fingers around my thumb and squeezed my thumb. It was almost as if he was saying, it's all right, it's all right. But I knew he was going to die. And at that moment, he spit up blood. And he died. He died. He was a kid, probably 18, 19, 20 years old. He had red hair. He died right in front of me. And I went into shock, I'll be honest, I went into shock. He was just a little boy. Just a little boy. I can't understand how a group of educated people, the Germans, these people went to the opera. They took their kids to Sunday school. They went on picnics. These are not Mongolians. These are educated people. How could they do such a thing? How could they do such a thing?
So that's a story, as you can imagine, we'll play every D-Day. It was a beautiful story. We talked to him for about an hour about his life. And by the way, what he did after his life, because can you imagine witnessing this carnage all the way through the Battle of the Bulge, losing all your friends like that? It's remarkable what that greatest generation did. Because you know, you can have a scab and a scar and you can keep picking at it, or you can move on. And a lot of these guys, they just moved on. Because going backwards just wasn't helping them. They said, you know what, we fought for these freedoms, let's go start enjoying our life. And they got back, and they went through college in a year or two. They started having families. They loved hard, because they'd lost hard. And your alternative to loss and grief or injustice or prejudice, and by the way, as an Arab American, and Samir will tell you, we faced plenty. I was the only Arab kid in a town of 20,000. I heard every nasty joke. I would come home and I would complain, and my mother would say, you're going to go back and you're going to get to know that boy. Somebody's teaching him stupidity. You're beautiful. Lebanese people are beautiful. Go talk to that boy. What a great response by a parent. I could have organized my whole life around that grievance. And there was only a slim minority that didn't like me because I was an Arab, and all those other white people had no problem with me. So I would have made massive assumptions about all white people because of a couple of knuckleheads. And believe me, there are plenty of knucklehead Arabs who are prejudiced. Get Arabs talking about Jews. It's disgusting. Prejudice knows no border. African Americans have prejudice. White people have prejudice. Chinese don't like Japanese. Japanese don't like Chinese. People have been fighting each other forever. It's so much more about the human heart than about racial identity or ethnic identity. So, next story. Anybody know who this man is? His name is Ralph Lauren. But that wasn't the name he was born to. His actual name was Ralph Lipschitz. He didn't think that was much of a name to start a fashion brand. So at the age of 16, he walks up to his parents, his father was a house painter in the Bronx, and his mother was a stay-at-home mom who liked to paint. So not exactly a man of privilege. By the way, I actually believe that there's no such thing as white privilege or black privilege. There's just father privilege. I mean, people who have fathers have the privilege. I've met all kinds of miserable, wretched, rich people who just don't have a chance because their parents are wealthy. They have no hunger. They have no ambition. They have no desire. They just want to do with daddy's money. I feel for those people. I'd much rather be somebody who doesn't have much. I grew up with almost nothing. But it's mine. We did it. My family did it. We had nothing when we came here. So Ralph Lauren has nothing. His family has nothing. At 16, he decides he wants to be a fashion designer. And he goes to college, but he drops out. Because, well, if you want to be a fashion designer, you just got to start. Right? Look at the guy who did FUBU. What did he do? He sold hats and T-shirts out of a car. He could have complained about capitalism. He embraced capitalism. He's a billionaire. And these are your rebuttals. Complain about it, learn the rules of the game, and learn how to thrive. So Ralph Lauren, well, he works for Brooks Brothers. He cuts in all the best fashion houses. And at the age of 21, he decides to start his own company. He has saved up enough money, and he decides to make a beautiful set of ties, and he puts them in a beautiful mahogany case. He gets a car he can't afford, a suit he can't afford, and he starts to go sell the ties. And we pick up his story right here, and it's quite a story. Back it up.
We bring you back to the late 1960s, and a young, handsome,
confident Ralph Lauren arrives in a sports car to a meeting with Bloomingdale. He strike a deal, but not too eager.
He showed them to the Bloomingdale tie buyers.
That's Marvin Trout, a former president of Bloomingdale's.
Who said, I like them, I'll buy them, but I don't want that Ralph Lauren label on it, I want a Bloomingdale label. Now here's Ralph starting and struggling in business, about to get an order from Bloomingdale's, closed the sample case, and said, I will not accept the order without my name.
It's a matter of staying on a path, staying in a direction, having a point of view, believing in what you're doing, and having the scope and the focus to say, this is who I want to be, this is what I like.
An important lesson for entrepreneurs, betting on yourself and your product, and having the wisdom for knowing when to strike a deal and when to walk away. And good thing Ralph did, because just a few months later, he would get a call back from Bloomingdale's. Here again is Martin Trout.
I thought the ties were terrific. And if he wanted his name on it, that was fine, because I felt the ties would sell.
Just 1 year with Bloomingdale's, Ralph sold $500,000 in ties, and soon enough caught the attention of other big department stores, followed by an expansion from the tie industry into upscale menswear, women's wear, lifestyle, and home products. Ralph soon became a household name around the world. By 1986, Ralph Lauren's company was worth over an estimated $500 million. At a glance, things were going quite well, but a look behind the scenes told another story. In 1987, just as Ralph was about to make the cover of Time magazine, he was also diagnosed with a brain tumor.
At the same time as I was on the cover of Time magazine, I knew Time magazine was coming out, and I knew I was going in for a brain tumor operation. I couldn't enjoy either one. I couldn't enjoy Time magazine. And the two distances of life, the fact that on one hand I hit the heights of one side, on the other side, the impossible thing happened on Time magazine, and the impossible thing happened on brain tumor. How could I get a brain tumor? Where'd that come from? Where'd that come from? I look great. Where'd that come from? You know, that happens to somebody else. Time magazine happens to somebody else. Let's split right in half. So that alone was an incredible contrast in my life. Just my life has been an incredible contrast. And growing up and in my career, the heights were so hard to even deal with in a funny way. So the brain tumor coming along. Fortunately, it was benign. The experience of looking at my wife and my family, I remember being told that I have to go in for an operation. I remember seeing my daughter and my son were very little at the time in this big open space. I said, I can't believe this. I all of a sudden stepped out of my life and was looking at them as if I wasn't there anymore.
And so even at the height of his success, what if that brain cancer, well, what if it had killed him? So looking at Ralph Lauren as some rich, successful guy, when he's got a tumor, I'd rather have no money and no tumor, right? So what is wealth? What is privilege? And by the way, it all has to do with coveting, right? I want what that guy has. I want what that person has. You know, I was very lucky as a young age, my dad said, get to know the best teachers in the world. Seek them out. And I did. I sought out one of the best acting teachers of the world, studied with her for a year. Amazing experience, Uta Hagen. But it was a symphonic conductor that I learned the most from. His name is Benjamin Zander. Look at his videos, watch them. They'll inspire you. And people from all around the world want to study with Mr. Zander. And here's what he does. He starts off his class by giving everyone an A. Everyone gets an A. But he said, but I want you to write a note to me. Dear Mr. Zander, I deserve an A because I accomplished the following through the year. And it better mean something. And then what he does is he measures the student against their own standard. Not some external standard like an SAT. Who cares? Who cares? No disrespect to my friend Samir. Who cares what grade he gives you? Who cares what your neighbor's doing or what your friend's doing? What Zander wanted to do is get that individual to set their own standards for themselves and then hit them. By the way, coaches do a great job of this. Nick Saban doesn't say to some kid who grew up in a really tough neighborhood and his mom had drug problems and his father was in jail, poor you. No, he does nothing of the sort. He holds them to the highest bar, demands excellence from them, or kicks them off the damn team. And what do you know? The kids perform, because no one's making excuses for them on the athletic field. So here, Zander creates a standard where you're making your own standard, you gotta hit it, or you don't get an A. And the degree to which you come close, that's where the grade comes. And then he sits down and he talks to them about the voice in their head. And he gets up close to me, he says, and here's what the voice sounds like. You're no good. Your mom was right, you're stupid. Your girlfriend's prettier than you. That guy has more money. He's white, he's black, you're this, you're that. Negative voices in your head. He said, my job is to get rid of those negative voices and to fill you with the world of possibility. One is the world of downward spiral, and he starts just putting spirals. I can't do this. I don't have enough money. I'm not tall enough. I'm not smart enough. You're doomed. And then he goes over here to the world of radiating possibility, where you're God's creation. And your life will be determined by your choices, the degree to which you work hard to accomplish things, the degree to which you don't make excuses when you fail, and never, ever blame the other guy. Look in a mirror, and take responsibility for your life. And the world marches down a path. Put in Benjamin Zander, look at his YouTube videos. They're positively inspiring. And all my life, I've just been sort of living that standard that Zander gave to me. By the way, you get to create your own life this way. There was no such living that I'm making now in any high school or college council. No one would say, oh, you can make a living writing, getting involved in politics, starting a radio show. No one could have told Samir that you can make a living teaching and talking around the world about magazines. There's no such job description. So as you're preparing for your adult lives, just remember there's nothing you can't do if you don't set your mind to it. And that failure is a guarantee. You just got to keep going. You got to keep going. I'll leave you with one last story. I'm going to skip ahead here. This was a remarkable story. I'll just give you a very brief summary. Carole King is a songwriter. Aretha Franklin is one heck of a singer. And there was a Kennedy Center celebration of Carole King's writing. And at the very end, Aretha Franklin comes onto the stage with his beautiful fur coat, takes it off, sits in front of a Steinway. She's a remarkable pianist, in addition to being one of the greatest gospel singers of all time. And she sings Carole King's You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman. And Carole King is blowing kisses at Aretha. Aretha is blowing kisses at Carole. And it was a spectacular statement of the possibility and realm of what race relations can look like in this country. It was so beautiful. Carole King, Jewish, grew up with no money, mom's teachers in the Upper West Side of New York, writes this song called You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman. She's not a very good singer, she's got to sell the song. The song's sitting in oblivion. Aretha Franklin happens to be in a record company called CBS at the time, and the person who is shepherding her career has told her to lose weight and try and be the next Diana Ross. Only she doesn't want to be the next Diana Ross. So a great record executive breaks that contract with CBS, tells her she's a soul singer, tells her she's a gospel singer, tells her to put back on the weight that God intended her to have, because she's starving herself. She's miserable. And he introduces this Carole King song to Aretha Franklin. And through the miracle of intellectual property, through the miracle of music, this white woman and this black woman come together in a way that's so epic and so beautiful. And only in America does this kind of thing happen, where a black woman born in Memphis to perhaps the most renowned black pastor in America, C.L. Franklin. He had his own record deal. That's how great a pastor he was, with Chess Records. And born in Memphis, born in New York, she moves to Detroit, and they make beautiful music together. In fact, I think that's what's so unique about American music. It's just, we're such a melting pot that no one can match our music. The world listens to our music. The world watches our movies. There's a reason, and it's not because we're a bunch of ugly nativist racists. It's just not true. I'm not saying there aren't racists here. I experienced them. But they're the minority, and they're knuckleheads. And they were taught it, so let's unteach it. In individual love, not through force, not through punishment, not through censorship. It doesn't work, being a bully. Love these people. They're just being taught stupid stuff, right? So the last story is something, it came to our attention. By the way, there's a picture here of Martin Luther King. We do a magnificent piece about his life twice a year for an hour. And we just play the sermons of Martin Luther King. Because it turns out that he had a PhD in Bible studies. In fact, he thought the Bible was so relevant that he got doctorates and an undergraduate degree in it. And so relevant that he became a reverend. At the age of 19, he was a co-pastor at the Ebenezer Church in Atlanta. The civil rights movement was born as a justice movement for God. For God. So what we do is we play the final sermon of Reverend Martin Luther King the night before he's assassinated, in which he predicts his own assassination, goes to speak anyway, despite all the death threats, because he's not afraid, because he's got God on his side. And if God's called him, God's called him. And then he starts preaching about the Good Samaritan of all things. On the very last sermon that Martin Luther King ever gives, he talks about why 2 Levites walk by a man who's in need and why one doesn't. And the question those Levites were asking was, what will happen to me if I help that man on the side of the road? Might he mug me? Might there be other people in wait trying to just jump me? The other one said, what will happen to that man on the side of the road if I don't help him? Think about those 2 questions and the response. One was selfish. One was a beautiful rebuttal to someone in need. What's our response to poverty? All of you. Are you giving of your time? Give you a little extra money? Are you buying an extra set of iPods, or are you giving it to someone poor? What are we doing with our hearts and our love? Are we petitioning and marching for other people to give their money to poor people? Or are you doing something for poor people? I had no money growing up, but we were always in soup kitchens. We were always letting people live in our house all the time. We were adopting people continually. My mother had a heart this big. Anybody who was struggling, she was taking care of them. In the end, that's how you really solve all of life's problems in the end, person to person. The more we try and get third parties to take care of this, well, we'll never get anywhere. But this is the last story. It turns out a lot of women have miscarriages. And it's a profound and tragic thing that happens to them. And they don't know how to talk about it because there was no actual baby. But don't tell the woman they didn't lose a baby. 1 in 4. So I'm going, oh my goodness, there are 10 million pregnancies. That's a lot of women walking around in grief. It turns out there's a month dedicated to this grief, and it's Infant Loss Month, and it was signed into law in 1996 as just sort of honoring that these things happen to women, and we should perhaps tell their stories. And so what we did is, every October we announced to our audience, we have almost 2 million people listening to us every day now, 2 hours a night, 5 days a week. And again, it's not our stories we're telling. But imagine this, if 1 in 4 women experience a miscarriage, and you take that over 20 or 30 years, that means half of my audience, if not 2/3, somewhere in their family, they've gotten through this. So this is a young lady named Megan, and we had asked our audience to send us stories. And this is the story she sent in.
And we've had personal experience here on the show with miscarriage and stillborn birth. Me personally, my wife's best friend in Baltimore, Pam, she had 1 miscarriage, and oh my goodness, the grief. And then she went back, she and her husband committed to having another child, and she got pregnant. She was so happy, but she was so scared, and then came the news, she lost another. And I'd never seen that kind of grief in my life. And so we bring you these stories, and we want to hear yours, by the way. OurAmericanNetwork.org. Write to us, we'll help you record your story. And don't worry, we're not afraid to hear you cry, we're not afraid of the grief. And share it with others, it'll help. Today's story comes from Megan Byer, who experienced a stillborn birth. And in spite of the haze of her suffering, she made the effort to write her husband a tribute of gratitude. She graciously recorded it for us.
Together we held our son, who was stillborn, in the middle of the night. You helplessly watched your daughter take her last breath on my warm, bared chest. You were always calm, collected, and stoic, although grieving in your own man way. As my world fell apart, somehow you did not. I'm in awe of that each and every single day. Difficult decisions and logistics were all part of your job. You calmly stepped out for phone calls. You spoke to the nurses and birth registrar. You made the arrangements with the funeral home and met with them before I did, arranged the cremations and obtained death certificates when insurance needed it. You worked out all the payments with whomever needed paid. Not one complaint ever crossed your lips through all those long, dark days. As my body healed and my heart ached from the traumatic deliveries, you wrapped your arms around me and held my soul so tightly. We cried together many lonely nights as we grieved the path we envisioned. I think back in awe of the strength you displayed, your determinations and wise decisions.
She goes on for another 5 minutes, and at the end of it I say, what kind of a man are you going to be? The man who gets that note or not? We do that a lot, too, on the show. Who are you going to be? I love to tell young men, are you going to be the guy who gets the girl pregnant and leaves? Is that who you're going to be? And leave a gaping hole in a kid's life for the rest of their life? Is that who you're going to be? Or are you going to be the guy who fathers that kid, shows him love, goes to work every day, and mans up? And women, who are you going to be? What choices are you going to make with your life? I wish schools did this more, had these conversations, not treat you like infants. Again, people your age were fighting wars in every other century. Right? So who are we going to be? And that's why we tell these stories, because people can step into these stories. That woman's letter to her husband, we had almost 1,000 people write us telling us, I wrote a letter to my husband thanking him. We don't do this enough. We're not grateful enough. Entitlement creeps into our lives in ugly ways. We're entitled to nothing in this world. Nothing. And we should be grateful for almost anything we have, and we should express gratitude to the people who do good things for us as often as possible. Because it's not a given. It's not a given. So it was a beautiful thing that this woman did for her husband, writing this note of gratitude, and moreover sharing it. Because it inspired more women to say thank you to their husbands, who, by the way, are not perfect, but they're trying to do a good job, many husbands. Every once in a while, a nice thank you note can really carry the day in our lives. So that's a short and long of what we're doing at Our American Stories. I think the biggest reason for success, it's coming from a small town. Generally, entertainment comes from New York, and it comes from Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. I was in New York, and I was in Washington, and I had big hit shows. But there's something different about this show. Because people live different in small and mid-sized towns than they do in big cities. They have things called cars. Lots of them go to churches. Lots of them own guns, and they're not crazy people. They just own guns and like hunting. So how do you talk to this vast part of the country that's different than the people who live in big buildings? And look, I'm a kid who spent a lot of his life in Brooklyn. I love New York. But people in New York think different than people in Des Moines. Not better, not worse, just different. And so we started a show from a small town, and here's the craziest thing. We're hearing from LA. Thanks so much for this story. Reminds me of home. I lived in LA for a year as a young actor. And all I met were people from small towns moving to Los Angeles. Same in New York. So there's small town people everywhere, and even in the cities. They try and create little small towns. My little block that I lived in Brooklyn, we tried to have a block party. We tried to get to know each other better, because people yearn for community. They yearn for it. So that's why we're doing well with storytelling. I'd love to take any of your questions about storytelling, about career, how to think about career. This is the best time ever to be in the business you're in, which is marketing and storytelling. There's never been a better time for a young person to be in the business. Years ago when we were coming up, it was impossible for young people to break through. You had to go through all these layers of editors, all these permission slips you had to get from people telling you, I don't like this, I don't like that, don't do this, don't do that. Now you can just start your own thing. You can just go. You could form your own company tomorrow with a couple of friends and start selling and pitching. Nothing stops you from doing these things. Nothing at all. So just to let you know, never been a better time to do what you're doing, and you have a great major if you've chosen marketing. Just learn how to storytell, because the core of marketing is storytelling. If you can't tell a story, I don't know how you're going to market. I just don't know how you're going to do it. And you tell good stories by asking other people questions about their story, and shut up, because no one wants to hear your story anyway. You'll find a friend really quickly if you just ask them a question. Tell me about yourself. You'll have a fast friend.
We have time for one quick question. I guess you've covered it all, Mr. Habeeb.
I did do my best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.